Welcome, everyone, to Court Accountability Action and Legal AF. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm Lisa Graves with Court Accountability, and I'm happy to be here today with my partner, Alex Aronson, and with the amazing Molly Coleman from People's Parity Project. We're going to talk a bit about what's going on with the courts and more, and what you can do about it. So, Alex, let me turn it over to you to start to kick us off on what you and Molly have been talking about.
Sure. Thanks, Lisa. Molly, thanks so much for joining us. Molly, as you know, obviously, but as our audience might not, you're a super important and close partner of our work here at Court Accountability, and we're so grateful for everything you're doing at People's Parity Project. Wanted to make sure we had a chance to have you on to talk about this incredible new report you guys issued on how the Supreme Court helped Trump win this election. It's a topic we discuss often here, but I was so grateful to see this incredibly concise and jam-packed report, breaking it down piece by piece, not just what the court did last year, but the record of its anti-democratic constitutional wreckage that really piecemeal led and combined together led to this Trump victory this fall. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to share that report with this audience and to sort of break down your analysis, because I think it's so spot on. And also like maybe get into why it's important that we not give up on this understanding, why it's important that we continue to talk about what the court did to lead us here. Could you start to maybe walk us through this report a bit?
Definitely. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Lisa. Super excited to be here. Excited to be talking about this awful, terrible topic, but at least I'm doing it with all of you. So here we are. So the report that we just published at People's Parity Project Action is entitled How the Supreme Court Helped Trump Win. I will say, just to preface this, I want to give a lot of credit to our author, Jenny Hunter, who is a longtime labor lawyer, legal thinker, court reformer, writer, who took the lead on this and really helped make it what it was. We started from the recognition that the courts are going to play a very important role. We've already seen the importance of the federal courts in responding to what the Trump administration has been trying to do, the wreckage, the havoc that they have tried to create over the last several weeks. We know that they have an important role to play. But even within these first few weeks of the Trump administration, we've started to hear a lot of language, a lot of even progressive folks talking about the courts as our saviors, as, oh, wow, thank God for the judiciary, because it's the only check that we have on the Trump administration. And we think that that analysis is fundamentally flawed. We think it's really important to take a step back and not just look at what are the courts doing today, what are they going to do tomorrow, but to understand how did the judiciary get us to the point that we are in the constitutional crisis that we are in this moment. So we went through it and tried to sort out what did the Supreme Court do that was specific to helping Trump get reelected. That's things like ensuring that he was immune from prosecution for his role in trying to overthrow the government in 2020 and 2021. It included ensuring that states could not block Trump from appearing on their ballot, essentially nullifying a key provision of the 14th Amendment. And in doing so, saying that there was nothing that states could do to stop an insurrectionist from being elected president. So there were a few Trump-specific things, and happy to get into any of that more. But there's also a long arc, as you referenced, Alex, of decades and decades of the Supreme Court, the lower courts, interfering with our ability to build a true democracy. So we have Citizens United, in which the Supreme Court said it's A-OK for oligarchs like Elon Musk to buy the presidency. We've had decades and decades of the court attacking voting rights, attacking this idea that we can actually live in a true multiracial democracy that Congress and the people in this country have tried to build. We have the court attacking the ability for Democratic administrations like the Biden administration to accomplish anything, right? The Biden administration tried to do a whole host of things that would have made people's lives meaningfully better that then Vice President Harris would have been able to run on in the campaign. But the Supreme Court got in his way over and over again. And so there was less of a record of success and accomplishments for the vice president to point to in her campaign. There's a whole host of other things, the ways that the court has undermined the power of unions, prevented people from building power, prevented progressives from building power in this country. But I think really taken together, what it shows is that we didn't need to have a Bush v. Gore situation. We didn't need the Supreme Court coming in at the 11th hour in order to steal the election for Donald Trump, because they had spent decades, they had spent years, certainly, ensuring that people like Donald Trump can take power in this country, and actually specifically Donald Trump himself.
Yeah, and moreover, with incredibly, powerful tools through that Trump immunity decision, which not only gave him that immunity from criminal prosecution, but gave him these broad preclusive and conclusive powers, which he's now asserting to the max in a way that maybe even this Roberts Court majority might be uncomfortable with, which leads us, I think, to this dynamic that you describe, right? Where, increasingly, just as in the first Trump administration, folks are kind of looking to the courts as a guardrail, this court might, in fact, try to act as a guardrail on some of these questions, which I don't think should take folks by surprise if they kind of do the right thing once in a while. But then sort of it leaves us in this really challenging posture of like, what does that mean exactly when they are there for so much of this? They created the conditions for so much of this. And if we want to hold on to our aspirations for this democracy that you describe, right, the restoration of the rights and freedoms that they have been steadily stripping away, and a future that we envision, how can we escape from this thicket without conceding to the legitimacy of a court that has been acting in an illegitimate way all along?
I think that's exactly right. And one of our goals with this report and with so much of our work is making sure that when we think about what are we building after the Trump years, right? What comes next, that we aren't putting our faith in an institution that is not going to serve the goals of a true democracy. And I think that is why it's so important to have this context, to have this history of what the court has done. Because if we just take a snapshot in time, if we look at the first time that the Supreme Court strikes down a Trump administration action, which, like you said, we should expect that they will do, it's very easy to be like, oh, great, the courts, they will save us. They have saved us. They're always going to save us. Let's make sure that as we build forward, we double down on the power of the courts. And when we look at the history of their involvement in our democracy and their support for, or lack thereof, our fight for progress and our fight for a better future, this is not an institution that we want to increase the power of. And so as we think about what comes next, I think it's really important to understand that.
Yeah, I so appreciate your report, Molly, and the team's report over there, because it's so close to my heart. I'm about to publish a book called Without Precedent about how John Roberts orchestrated this revolution, really this assault on voting rights. And then obviously what we saw last year with the immunity decision and the Colorado ballot access decision. And Alex often talks about how President Abraham Lincoln talked about, if we concede power to only have the judiciary decide our rights, we really are not living in a real democracy. We do not have democratic control. And so I'm excited to hear about some of the things you're talking about in terms of building up democratic power and institutions where we're not just relying on the courts to protect our rights. I wonder if you could speak to that a bit.
Definitely. And I so appreciate, Lisa, that you brought in sort of the Abraham Lincoln quotes, right? These are not new ideas. The idea that the court should not be the ultimate policymaking body in a democracy isn't radical. It isn't new. This is something that has long been understood by people at the forefront of leading our democracy. And I think it's really important that we reclaim those ideas right now. So our focus at PPP and PPP Action, like you said, is really on thinking about where should power lie in this country and who is ultimately responsible for charting the future of the country. Right now, what we have seen is that we have a judiciary that certainly thinks that it should be the one making choices about our collective future, really the only one making choices about our collective future. And we think that fundamentally that rule by a judge is antithetical to being in a democracy, and that what we need to be doing is investing in our collective power, both the power of the people to build together and the power of our elected officials who are actually democratically accountable. So what we have been advocating for is a whole host of reforms that really look at the balance of power between the courts and Congress and how we might right-size that power distribution. Right now, what we have seen Congress kind of ceding power over the years to the courts. The court is going to take as much power as Congress lets it. And we think that there are some really important and valuable tools that Congress could use to push back on that. So there are a whole host of things, from big comprehensive legislation that could be passed if there was, a real progressive governing moment, to a sort of small procedural elements that we could add into legislation to protect those priorities, that democratically enacted legislation, from the courts. So there are a whole bunch of different tools, but I think at the core of all of this is the idea that it is going to be the people ourselves who get us out of this, and not even a really good judge or a really good Supreme Court justice. That there's no shortcut for building power. There's no shortcut for persuading the people of the righteousness of our cause. And I think, again, to go back to this idea that the courts might save us in this moment, they just fundamentally are not going to. They can't. They're not built to do that. And I understand the instinct to want that, because it would be really cool if there was one person who would come and save us from this mess that we find ourselves in. But that's not how things work in the world, and certainly not in a democracy where there's no substitute for building the power of the people.
Well, maybe it's, at the risk of being too pie in the sky, given kind of how bleak things are these days, I was hoping we could get into some of the reform proposals that your report, puts a marker down on, and where we, I think have had really strong alignment in terms of where we'd like to see the reform conversation going. And I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but we've been a little bit on an island in the broader judicial advocacy community around the wisdom of some of these reforms, like using the exceptions clause in Article 3 of the Constitution to have Congress start limiting or channeling the court's jurisdiction to even decide some of these cases. Right? I mean, the court's docket is 99% comprised of its appellate jurisdiction, which is arguably, I think pretty clearly in the text of the Constitution, constrained by such exceptions and regulations as Congress shall make. And, we think that actually gives Congress quite broad powers to control the jurisdiction of this court. And, I think this actually speaks to some of the mindset that we see from folks now about how we need the courts to come in and save us. And the idea that the courts might not be there because of a provision like this, I think makes a lot of our allies, uncomfortable. But how do you see, the importance of those reforms, the path to those types of reforms? We did, I'll note, see some movement toward embrace of these ideas after that shocking Trump versus United States immunity decision, when Chuck Schumer, with 36, I think, of his colleagues in the Senate, introduced the No Kings Act, which very clearly had this powerful jurisdiction channeling and stripping approach. So I think we're maybe making some headway in it, but why is this so important? Why does it make people uneasy? And how can we start to build momentum around these ideas?
Yeah, I don't disagree that we've been on an island, but I will say it's a big island. There's lots of room for others to come join us out here. It's really fun and nice. So a couple of things. You're right that I think people generally feel uncomfortable. And I think in this moment, we can expect that people will become even more uncomfortable or skeptical of the idea of taking back some power from the courts. I will say, I think it's really helpful to, as Lisa did, go back to the fact that these aren't new or radical ideas, and that people have long thought that the court should not have this much power. And just because the Supreme Court justices want as much power as they can take does not make that right. I also think that we really need to confront some of the myths that we tell ourselves within the progressive movement about the role of the courts. We talk a lot about the Warren Court era, and there were some very important things that happened via litigation during when we had Chief Justice Warren, and we had a court that was open to some of this progress. And that was a blip in time. We published another report actually last spring looking at sort of the broad history of, not just the last 5 years, not just the last 10 or 20 years, but really the complete history of the Supreme Court and its attack on the rights of working people, and its embrace of corporate power, and its embrace of regressive conservative interests. And yes, we have had some good things happen at the Supreme Court. And the vast majority of the history suggests that the courts are not on our side. And that is going to hold true over the next 4 years, as we might occasionally see the court do the right thing or step in and curb some of the power of the Trump administration. But that does not mean that they are our friend. That does not mean that they are a body that deserves to have unlimited, unbounded amounts of power invested in it. So I think that really helping folks to understand that history, understanding that we have other tools to check would-be authoritarians. And frankly, I will say, I think that we are going to see over the coming months and years that the courts are not a particularly effective tool for checking the power of an authoritarian. We've already seen Trump and Musk and others start to suggest that if they don't like what the courts say, they won't follow court orders. So this is both not where we should be investing power in principle in a democracy, but it's also not a great safeguard of our rights and of our future. So I think that there's going to be a lot of work to do to make this a politically popular path forward. And I think it's essential that we do that. And like you said, Alex, we've seen the Senate start to push back. We've seen Chuck Schumer, of all people, start to say, hey, maybe the Supreme Court, which is clearly wedded to this idea of enhancing Trump's power, maybe they shouldn't be the ones who get to decide how much power a president like Donald Trump gets. And maybe, in fact, the people and their elected representatives should be the ones to say how much power a president can have in a democracy. So I think that was an incredibly hopeful development over the summer. It's unfortunate that it took something as egregious as the immunity decision to get us to that point. But it makes me hopeful that, Democrats, folks in the Senate, progressives will start to have more of an interest in understanding the whole toolbox at our disposal and understanding some of the tools that we might bring to bear as we, again, move beyond this administration.
Well, thank you so much, Molly. That was just such an excellent description of both the history of the court and where we are now and where we have to go. A real fan of the People's Parity Project and People's Parity Project Action. Thank you so much, Alex and Molly, for being part of this conversation today. Please like and subscribe and share this video. And thank you again for joining us over here at Legal AF with Court Accountability Action, and today with Molly Coleman from People's Parity Project Action. Thank you so much.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.